Hey y'all, this is episode number 20. We made it 2-0. So this is a review of the first of the presidential debates, the Democratic presidential debates. And I'll be getting ready to watch the second one right now. And then episode 22 is going to be kind of a deeper dive into the main talking points that I saw from both nights and giving a Liberty standpoint on them. So enjoy this review of the first night. It was some interesting things. I think some good stuff in this episode that you can pull from it. Thank you once again to Flavor Aid for the intro music you're about to hear. Their EP, All My Life, is available on Spotify and all streaming services, so make sure to check that out as well. And I hope you enjoy the episode. What's up, y'all? This is the Sovereign Individual Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Guerra, and thank you once again for joining me today. If you're liking what you're hearing so far, please subscribe, rate, and review the show, and share it with anybody you think might enjoy listening to it and hearing these liberty topics. So, like I said, there's going to be 3 episodes this week, and last night was the first of the Democratic presidential debates, primary debates. And so I'm going to just be talking about a few observations from that and specifically an interaction, which I'm sure anybody who watched knows exactly the interaction that I'm going to be discussing. But yeah, just kind of a few things to go over, just kind of a few notes that I took down in regards to kind of what went on within the debate. And so, it was very clear who the establishment and who the corporate media has picked out of this group of 10 to be the front runner. It was Elizabeth Warren was given far more time and questions than any other candidate by a long shot. Cory Booker was also given a lot as well. Tulsi was given, I think, the 5th most or 6th most. I don't remember the exact amount. So we're going to get into that. There's some other stuff they did with regards to Tulsi as well. So let's just kind of talk about a few things, just a few notes again. I'm going to try to keep this relatively brief. There'll be another one tonight, and then I may have the next episode after the one for the debates tonight, maybe just be another one where I kind of dive into a little bit more on specific ideas on why they're bad and how to combat them. So I'll just kind of keep it general for right now as to why these are bad ideas, and I can get into more of the liberty response to them in a different episode. But I don't want these to go too long, and I kind of want to get a feel for tonight as to what may be the main talking points and the main ideas that I should try to present the liberty standpoint on. So we'll keep it generally, kind of basic and keep it short and sweet for the most part, because there's some other specific things that I really want to talk about from last night. So Beto and Cory Booker were speaking Spanish, as was Castro, but obviously he's a native speaker. I'm also that'll be the last time I refer to Robert O'Rourke as Beto in this review. I'm going to refuse to call him by that. He's Robert Francis O'Rourke. He is Irish, and he is not in any way Hispanic. So just as good old Rafael Cruz, who you might know as Ted, tries to play to identity politics by going by a different name than is his given name, so is Robert O'Rourke. So I'm going to keep referring to him as Robert. So Robert also refused to answer directly a question on the marginal tax rate, if he would support the 70% rate, I believe, is what Elizabeth Warren is suggesting. So this was kind of all from the beginning of the debate. Everybody hates the economy for the most part on that stage. Everyone who spoke about it was very much talking about how the economy doesn't work for the American people. It only works for the elite. So that's an easy thing to say in a debate like this. Obviously, this is supposed to be the party of the people, and so they're pandering to those folks, even though this is just as, I mean, both the parties are the parties of the elite. That's the only people that they care about. So, it's strictly talk in this regard. And the thing is when you talk about the economy, they talk about it, and a lot of people on the left talk about it as if it's a zero-sum game, as if billionaires having all this wealth means that the rest of the 99% or whatever can't have as much wealth because the billionaires are taking it all, as if it's some a pie or a pizza where there's a limited amount of slices and wealth can't be created, which is, first of all, not true. And second of all, when you look at statistics and how, the richest in the country have experienced economic growth of, I think it was something over 600% since 2008, I believe. I'd have to look up this exact stat and look at the numbers again. But then the bottom 50% have experienced economic growth of 170 some odd percent, something along those lines. So yeah, there's an inequality in the amount and in the way in which the wealth is being created, and the amount of wealth that's being the amount of growth that's being experienced by the groups, but it's rising for everybody. So again, it's not a zero-sum game in which that 600% means that the rest of the country can't experience as much growth, and the rest of the country was experiencing and a great amount of growth as well. So this idea is just kind of funny, especially being pushed by this party of the elite, and so that was just kind of an interesting thing in the beginning of the debates there. Booker mentioned wanting to let the free market work and to allow the free market to provide solutions, but was saying so through suggesting more government regulation and more government influence. Booker, that's not a free market. That's crony capitalism, which is what we have now, which is what you and all the 9 other people up there talking about the economy are so upset about. You're talking about these corporate giants, these tech giants, and the amount of power and influence that they have. Well, they have that amount of power and influence because you've got a government that's so involved in the economy, and that you've got this powerful entity called the state that exists, and they can buy influence within it. It harkens back to the net neutrality thing. All of the biggest tech giants, all these corporations that Elizabeth Warren is talking about need to be, broken up, these monopolies. All of them supported net neutrality. None of them ever support true liberty candidates. And it's because they know that with deregulation and with the government being involved less in the economy, that means more competition for them, and that's not good for them. So in talking about this, it's one of those, there's a lot going on when you're talking about how these corporations have grown and how the quote unquote free market and capitalism isn't working. Well, yeah, because it's working in exactly the way this form of crony capitalism is intended to work. This isn't a free market, which I've said many times before, and is one of, I think, the best arguments for capitalism, is that we haven't even experienced true free market capitalism, and we've seen what good has come out of not even true capitalism, how much good has been brought to the world, how extreme poverty is within about 22 decades of being eliminated completely, about how the life expectancy and the wages throughout the entirety of the world have risen throughout the existence of American economic expansion and the expansion of capitalism. So Yeah, I agree completely. Crony capitalism needs to go. The free market provides answers to all these things. And by doing that, we need less regulation and less involvement and influence by the government. You know, they're complaining about how these big tech companies and corporations are lobbying and spending, and big pharma is spending all these billions of dollars lobbying. Well, why do you think they do that? Because there's this power that exists, and it can be influenced through money, and then they can use that power and that influence to write the very regulations that keep competition out of it for them. You know, they talk about how expensive medicine is here in the United States. And it's one of those things, you can get the same type of prescription medication for like fractions of the cost in other countries. And people are like, why is that? Well, the FDA is a huge reason for that. The FDA has created a monopoly for big pharma. And so this is kind of the common theme of the night and of so many things that go on, especially when it comes to the left and to democratic debates like this, is the solution that they present is more government, bigger government, more money with it, more influence by the government, more regulation, when that's what's causing the problems to begin with. Like big pharma, they're talking about the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis came up a lot. Booker was talking about how it's devastated his community. What was his name? The dude from Ohio. Was that Tim Ryan? I know I'm going to be talking about him in a bit. I can't even remember if that was him. I don't know. Whoever the guy from Ohio was, he was talking about how it's devastated Ohio as well. And it's like, yeah, Big Pharma has been culpable in this. The United States government has been culpable in this, because it's not a coincidence that the opioid crisis has coincided with our time in Afghanistan, and the fact that there's huge opium trade and huge supply of opium that we're now in charge of and are able to control in Afghanistan. Like that is not a coincidence at all, that we've seen the drastic increase in opioid addiction in the time that we've been in Afghanistan. But even besides that, the government is culpable in it in another way. Marijuana has been illegal. Marijuana that can act as a painkiller, that can act to treat pain, that can act to help. Most of what opioids are prescribed for can be treated with marijuana and CBD. And it's been illegal for so long, so that hasn't even been an option. So you got this natural, non-addictive plant that has all these, we don't even know the swaths of health benefits that it truly has. We're only just scratching the surface of what it's able to do. We have an endocannabinoid system in our bodies that gets activated by this stuff. This is in our bodies, and the health benefits have become so well known that people around the country who for years were like, no, marijuana is a gateway drug, it's all these bad things, it's blah 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 blah, are starting to see the light. Like, no, this is a really good thing. And this whole like stereotype of the lazy stoner, that they just get high and they eat and they laugh, no, lazy people do that. They're already lazy. That's just enhancing the personality that they already have. So especially when it comes to something like Big Pharma. Or on this same token, you know, in the same light, the government has banned and made hemp illegal for decades. Well, we've got these folks in California and different states banning straws, complaining about plastic and how awful it is for the environment. You can make biodegradable plastic with hemp. So once again, we're seeing how the state has banned something that would have solved a problem and prevented a problem from occurring that we're now experiencing. So again, whenever these solutions are being brought up, and it's more state, more money, bigger government, bigger influence, more regulations, I don't think they're realizing that creates problems, always. Not just because the government is inept at doing stuff, but because then it can be bought out. There's no reason that hemp should have been illegal for all this time. But it was lobbied against by everything, plastics, concrete. It's such a vast amount of canvas. There's so many different uses for hemp that it had all kinds of different people lobbying against it. And that's what happens when you have a state, an entity like this, that's this big and this powerful and this involved in our lives, that they can use that money and influence to pass regulations and laws and make things illegal that are detrimental to the American people. Like, not just bad policy, absolutely detrimental to the American people, and then furthermore, the environment. So let's get in the environment real quick too, because that was a decent talking point. Governor Inslee, I think that's the governor, right? It's kind of hard to keep all these people straight, to be honest. The governor from Washington, he used wind power as an argument, talking about how it creates jobs. Maybe while you're building them, and maybe a few people to maintain them. But are you kidding me, bro? You're going to use wind power as an argument? Are you out of your mind? That is one of the most inefficient forms of energy in the entire world. And solar's not even there yet. Solar has the capability to be, but we're not even close there on the tech side. So any of these people, when they're talking about their plans to combat climate change, I don't have a problem if you want to do that. I'm not convinced on how big of an influence humans are actually having on the climate. For the entirety of the existence of the Earth, climate change has been the norm. The fact that the climate has been relatively stable for the past 100,000 years, 50,000 years, is what has allowed the human population to thrive and get to the point that it has. But it is not a normal occurrence in the history of the Earth for the climate to be this stable for this long. So, yes, climate change is a real thing. It's the natural order of the Earth. So if we're going to be talking about combating climate change, that's fine and good. But if your plan isn't talking about increasing the use of nuclear power as a clean form of energy, then I don't want to hear it, because your plan is fairy dust and it's not going to work. Like AOC and her Green New Deal, that is idiotic. If you want to talk about real steps that we can take, increasing the amount of nuclear energy that we use, and stop subsidizing wind and solar, because they're not efficient at the moment. Wind especially, just throw wind out. Wind power is never going to be a viable form of energy. Just forget about it. Stop it with the wind power. Solar, again, has the potential to get there. We're not there yet. Elon Musk, people like that are going to keep figuring it out, especially as they're exploring space exploration. That tech's going to get there. But in the meantime, we have amazing technology in the form of nuclear power. We have the United States Navy, the entire submarine force, and all the aircraft carriers have been nuclear powered for decades. So let's start focusing on real solutions. And when you're talking about climate change, if you're not talking about technology that can actually keep the climate at that's what we're going to need to work toward. We can't be focusing on, man, I'm really getting deep into this stuff. I didn't want to make this whole climate change thing. Okay. Again, these are things that are going to be talked about in later episodes and things that I want to get into. Sorry, I just get really passionate about this stuff and riled up, if you can't tell. But if your plan for combating climate change does not include increasing the scope and the use of nuclear power and encouraging that, again, not through government subsidies and not through the government paying it, but let's ease up on the regulations. Let's allow the investment of nuclear power. Let's make that a thing. Because it is, gosh, it's such an amazing amount of power that's clean. And we have tons and tons, thousands of kids who come out of the Navy having worked in the nuclear program, that there just aren't the jobs for it right now. And they could be helping to create this new wave of nuclear energy for the United States. So that was a big thing when it came to the environment. Oh, and that's a funny thing too. Something that was not brought up. The biggest polluter in the entire world is the United States military, the Pentagon. So that's again, the state doing something that's detrimental. You know, you talk. It's more polluting than like the next, like the top. I can't even remember the number. I can't remember if it was 300 or 3,000 private companies combined. The top polluting companies, it takes multiple factors of 10 of them to reach the amount of pollution that the United States government does. And that's from the United States military, and this is from a quote-unquote democracy. That's not even talking about how much pollution that socialist governments do, how much pollution the USSR did, and how much pollution China is doing right now. Like, China's going to catch us as far as pollution goes. Their military is condensed. Their navy is condensed to like the South China Sea. They don't travel far away from them at the moment, as far. So that's why it's a little more condensed. But they'll pass us up. So again, the state is the problem. When we're talking about things like this, the state creates these situations. It exacerbates these situations. So when you're talking about finding solutions to these and you're suggesting more money and more state power and a larger government, you're going to lose me. You're really going to lose me. Let's see, what else? What other big ones that I want to talk about? Oh, so when they were talking about immigration, which we touched on in the last episode, was very disappointing to me. I mean, it was pretty much what I expected as far as the talking points go. They got into a little bit of a debate about exactly how, which plan was the best, and Castro was arguing with Beto over 1325. But one of the things that really upset me, that it wasn't brought up here or at all, and especially by Booker, because he was talking about the plight of his community and his low-income community and how it's been devastated. And then especially when in regards to immigration, nobody brought up ending the war on drugs. I thought that was one of the things the Democratic Party was about. Nobody even touched it. So that was really disappointing to see when it came to the immigration debate, is nobody even mentioned that. And then they were actually mentioning increased foreign policy presence by the United States in Central and South America. And it hasn't worked, and it's helped create the situation that we're experiencing right now, where we have this crisis at the border, and it's an issue that's going on there, and more intervention by the United States government into Central and South America is certainly not going to help the situation. So that was really disappointing to see, as far as that goes. So let's see. They talked about healthcare as well. Warren and de Blasio were the only ones that want to abolish private healthcare. So you are out of your ever-loving mind if you think that it's okay for the government to abolish private healthcare and tell its citizens that you are only allowed to participate in state-run healthcare. That's abhorrent. I'm not even going to get into, again, there'll be a whole healthcare episode where we'll be talking about that. So, and some of these things, again, I'm going to go over 2 episodes from now as I dive into more specific, kind of get the idea of what are the main ones I want to combat there. But the idea of suggesting abolishing private healthcare is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. So let's see, what else have we got here? Oh, so gun control came up briefly as well. And I believe this was Cory Booker that mentioned this. Gun licenses. That if you need a license to drive a car, you should need a license to own a gun. This is really interesting, especially coming out of this debate, because this is the same party that tells us constantly that voter ID laws are wrong and immoral and unconstitutional, and then follow that up because black people and minorities, it is difficult for them to obtain licenses, driver's licenses. Therefore, it is unfair to require a driver's license ID or a form of government ID in order to vote. So it must be, and the amount of abject elitism you have to be able to look into a camera and say that you should have to have a license to own a gun. So you are telling these same people that you don't believe it's fair to ask them to have a proper form of ID in order to be able to vote. You are telling those exact same people they do not have the right to defend themselves. Because if it's hard enough for them to get a driver's license, I can only imagine the hoops that they're going to have to go through in a gun license. Not to mention the fact that you are basically making them pay an additional amount in order to be able to defend themselves. It must be nice living in a community and living a life in which you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about defending yourself. But Cory Booker especially, shame on you. You're talking about hearing gunshots in your neighborhood and you're suggesting making people pay in order to be able to defend themselves? That's disgusting. That is absolutely disgusting. And you're suggesting, what you're suggesting is going to force people, these same people who you're claiming can't get a driver's license, can't get a form of government ID. Well, then, if you're going to be forcing them to get a license in order to own a gun, where are they going to go? They're going to go to the black market. So then you're going to have more guns. You're going to have more guns being sold on the black market. It's just this suggestion. Gun control is racist. And it has been historically. It has always been about racism. It's always been about not letting those quote unquote people own guns. We can't let them own guns. So it was just, man, I hear that and it just makes my heart hurt that you believe that people who don't make a lot of money, these same people who you're claiming to be in their corner and trying to be their voice and speak for them and talk about how the economy's not working for them and all this stuff, you're going to try to you're going to force them to have to pay to get a license in order to be able to defend themselves? Oh. Okay, so let's get into Tulsi. The first question that Tulsi answered, they asked her about the gender pay gap, I believe. This major talking point of the Democrats. Castro wants to pass an equal pay law to make sure that no woman gets paid less than the man for the same work. Well, Castro, I'll be happy to let you know that law already exists. So you can cross that off your list. That law has been in existence since the 60s. But Tulsi ignored it. And I'm glad she did. One, because the gender pay gap is used as this rallying point by folks more specifically by the evangelical left, but a lot of folks on the left will use it as this rallying cry and to get people hyped up and fired up. And they don't even get into the nuance of it. It's strict. Again, this is trying not to get too into the weeds on these specific things, but the gender pay gap doesn't take into account the type of profession. It's just strictly an average of the amount of money that men make and women make. It doesn't take into account, the fact that they're housewives, that the fact that there are women that work part-time because they take care of their children and their spouse makes enough to where they don't have to work as hard. It doesn't take into account the fact that men are willing to work in fields that are far more dangerous and they get better pay as a result of that. Nobody talks about the fact that work deaths on the job are 97% male. So this whole gender pay gap thing is a very dishonest way of presenting what's actually going on here. And it's that when they're in the same profession, they are paid the same. But even if you're talking about two people doing the exact same job, salaries aren't always based on something like that. There's negotiation. Sometimes you negotiate for more than your coworker did when they were brought on. It's just how things happen sometimes. So again, it's strictly meant to rile people up. But I was glad Tulsi ignored it, because she talked about foreign policy, and because that's what needs to be heard in a debate like this. Like, nobody else was going to be talking about it, and certainly not with the expertise and the anti-war sentiments that Tulsi was going to be talking about. So I was glad that she ignored that question and talked about foreign policy, which was great. And then there was one question all night that was a slander question that was meant to try to cut the candidate down and try to attack them on something. And who do you think got that question? Who do you think the corporate media thought they needed to go after about something scandalous from their past? Well, it wasn't Elizabeth Warren and her lying about being Native American. Charlemagne the God was more critical of her on the Breakfast Club than anybody in the corporate media has been with Elizabeth Warren, about her lying about that and using that to get jobs, being referred to at Harvard as a woman of color professor. But no, she doesn't get questioned on that. Who gets questioned? Tulsi gets questioned about the fact that she had anti-LGBT views when she was younger. I did as well. And Tulsi answered it with grace, saying that, like a lot of people, she was raised in a socially conservative household, and she held views then that she doesn't hold any longer. But it's fascinating that the extreme anti-war candidate, the one who's making that the entirety of her platform, who ignored a question to talk about anti-war sentiment, that's the one that the corporate media chooses to go after. Because again, the corporate media wants war. They love war. They're the mouthpiece for the state, and the state always wants war as well. War is control. War is power. So that was not surprising at all, but yeah, I mean, she handled it well, but it was you knew exactly what was happening as soon as it went down. So, but let's talk about the good thing. Oh, and I do want to give credit. De Blasio did make one really good point when it came to foreign policy on talking about the War Powers Act and how we can't be continuing to go to war without congressional approval. That was actually a really good point. I was pleasantly surprised. That's about the only good thing he said all night, because he was talking about his time as an executive in New York and what he's doing to combat stuff there. It's like, bro, New York is suffering right now. Everybody's talking about how the metro's falling apart. You've got everybody, damn near everybody who makes over six figures a year is leaving. You're making all these promises to the lower class about the help and the free stuff that you're going to give them. But the people that are going to be paying for it, their money's leaving. You're not going to be able to tax them anymore. So that was just kind of funny. But he did make a really good point on there, so I wanted to give him credit on that. That was one of the really good points of the night. But let's talk about Tulsi Gabbard. Oh man, and it's been the talk of a lot of the internet, is the fact that she absolutely crushed Tim Ryan. So I'm gonna let the clip play. It's about 4 minutes long, but it's a good one. And it's just, man, she gets into him about the war in Afghanistan. So the question that's asked is about foreign policy and about, Afghanistan and our conflicts over there, and kind of, that, all that good stuff. Good stuff. I say that very sarcastically. But so then Tim Ryan started answering. So let's listen in here real quick. Just a moment.
Taliban claimed responsibility for killing 2 American service members in Afghanistan. Leaders as disparate as President Obama and President Trump have both said that they want to end U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, but it isn't over for America. Why isn't it over? Why can't presidents of very different parties and very different temperaments get us out of there? And how could you?
I appreciate that question. So I've been in Congress 17 years, and 12 of those years I've sat on the Armed Services Committee, either the Defense Appropriations Committee or the Armed Services Committee. And the lesson that I've learned over the years is that you have to stay engaged in these situations. Nobody likes it, it's long, it's tedious, but right now we have, so I would say we must be engaged in this. We must have our State Department engaged, we must have our military engaged to the extent they need to be. But the reality of it is, this president doesn't even have people appointed in the State Department to deal with these things. Whether we're talking about Central America, whether we're talking about Iran, whether we're talking about Afghanistan, we've got to be completely engaged. And here's why. Because these flare-ups distract us from the real problems in the country. If getting drones shot down for $130 million because the president is distracted, that's $130 million that we could be spending in places like Youngstown, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan, or rebuilding.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds, actually, to jump off what he said. He described engagement as the problem. Is that what you will tell the parents of those 2 soldiers who were just killed in Afghanistan? Well, we just have to be engaged. As a soldier, I will tell you that answer is unacceptable. We have to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. We are in a place in Afghanistan where we have lost so many lives. We've spent so much money that's coming out of every one of our pockets, money that should be going into communities here at home, meeting the needs of the people here at home. We are no better off in Afghanistan today than we were when this war began. This is why it's so important to have a president and commander-in-chief who knows the cost of war and who's ready to do the job on day one. I am ready to do that job when I walk into the Oval Office. Thank you very much.
Listen, I'm going to go down the line. I'm going to go down the line here. Well, you know what? You felt like she was responding. You get 30 seconds. Go.
Very good man.
Fair enough.
I appreciate that.
I hear what you're saying.
I would just say I don't want to be engaged. I wish we were spending all this money in places that I've represented that have been completely forgotten and we were rebuilding. But the reality of it is, if the United States isn't engaged, the Taliban will grow and they will have bigger, bolder terrorist acts. We have got to have some present there.
The Taliban was there long before we came in. They'll be there long before we leave.
Well,
we cannot keep U.S. troops deployed to Afghanistan thinking that we're going to somehow squash this Taliban that has been there, that every other country that's tried has failed. I didn't say squash them. When we weren't in there, they started flying planes into our buildings. So I'm just saying right now, the Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda did.
Well, I understand.
Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11.
I understand.
That's why I and so many other people joined the military to go after Al-Qaeda, not the Taliban.
The Taliban was protecting those people who were plotting against us. All I'm saying is, if we want to go into elections and we want to say that we got to withdraw from the world, that's what President Trump is saying. We can't. I would love for us to.
Protecting Al-Qaeda right now in Saudi Arabia.
Oh man, that last line, I love it. Saudi Arabia. I love any bashing of Saudi Arabia. So good job on that one, Tulsi. But yeah, no, I mean, she's absolutely right. And Tim Ryan immediately starts the answer to the question by saying we have to be engaged. Gets called out by Tulsi, and then his first thing that he says when he's responding to her is, "Look, I don't want to be engaged." All right, bro, you got owned bad. So he was pretty butthurt about it, and he put out a statement today regarding Afghanistan. So the Ryan campaign releases the following statement. While making a point as to why America can't cede its international leadership and retreat from around the world, Tim was interrupted by Representative Tulsi Gabbard. When he tried to answer her, she contorted a factual point Tim was making about the Taliban being complicit in the 9/11 attacks by providing training, bases, and refuge for Al-Qaeda and its leaders. The characterization that Tim Ryan doesn't know who was responsible for the attacks on 9/11 is simply unfair reporting. Further, we continue to reject Gabbard's isolationism and her misguided beliefs on foreign policy. We refuse to be lectured by someone who thinks it's okay to dine with murderous dictator like Syria's Bashar al-Assad, who used chemical weapons on his own people. That's the end of that statement. So, did you have Barry Weiss write this for you there, Tim Ryan? This whole Assad toady thing, man. It's played, and show your work. Where's the proof? She dined with Bashar al-Assad. She was invited to speak with him while she was visiting Syria. Again, like I've said before, diplomacy is not talking to your friends. Diplomacy is talking to the people that you don't like. And she's trying to get a feel for what's going on in Syria and what the people there want, how we can best help if in any way, and what's the best course of action there. And she gets invited to speak with the leader of that country. If we're going to hold people to standards about who they choose to have a meal with, then anybody who is or who they interact with or who they meet with, then anybody who has met with George W. Bush, Barack Obama, or President Trump should all be called war criminal sympathizers, and we should call them out for the same thing, because all three of those presidents are war criminals. They've killed innocent people around the world. They've dropped bombs on innocent people around the world. Obama created an open-air slave market. So if you met with Obama, you support open-air slavery. Is that how you see how ridiculous that is? You see why that argument doesn't work? Not to mention the fact that those chemical attacks have all been proven to be false. And I just went over the Duma one and how that got proven to be false. So, yeah. Think of a different insult, bro. That's what happens when you know you're wrong. You start trying to cut at you can't argue with Tulsi on policy. You can't argue with her on facts. You can't argue with her on the content of what she said. So you have to go to personal attacks based on nonsense, because that's the only option that you have left. Nah. Nope. Not buying it, bro. You got owned and you're done in this race. But who's not done in this race is Tulsi Gabbard. Thankfully, I was listening to Dave Smith's podcast episode today. It was released today, but it was recorded yesterday, and he was talking about what he wanted to see in the primary or in this debate, and that he wanted to see a moment when somebody challenged Tulsi on foreign policy and she just owned them, and that's exactly what happened. So Google Trends put out a tweet last night, and it's a map of the United States, and it's before and after the debate. So before the debate, Elizabeth Warren was the most searched candidate in like almost every state. Cory Booker was the most searched in Alaska, Iowa, Tennessee, South Carolina, Maryland, and New Jersey, his home state. Beto was the most searched in Wyoming and Texas, his home state. And Tulsi was the most searched in Hawaii, her home state. During the Miami debates, during the debate, Tulsi Gabbard was the most searched in almost every state. Like, it's switched. Basically, all the states that Elizabeth Warren was the most searched in. Every state I didn't name in that was what Elizabeth Warren was the most searched in. So now every state, pretty much. So the only states that Elizabeth Warren was searched in was Oklahoma, her home state, and then, where she was born anyway. And then Cory Booker was the most searched in South Dakota, Michigan, Indiana, Vermont, New Jersey, his home state, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee. The rest of the country, the most searched candidate was Tulsi. So that's a really positive thing to see come out of this. And again, we need an anti-war candidate like this. We need somebody who can speak on it correctly from a point of knowledge and a point of intelligence about it, who knows what they're talking about, who knows the cost of this and why it's so bad and so wrong for it to be occurring and for us to be continuing to fight these wars. And to see that she was trending like that, and that there was huge spikes. She was the second most overall searched, according to Google Trends, and she got the second biggest spikes as far as individual moments throughout the debate where she was getting searched, according to Google. So that's a really good thing. That's a really good thing. And I know that I have contributed to her campaign because I want her on these debate stages. And I encourage you, if you are anti-war along with me and you believe in this and you don't buy into the hype that she's some Assad apologist or toady, and that I still don't get how that's a valid argument by anybody. But if you believe in anti-war and you want to see U.S. foreign policy change and to see us stop killing innocent people around the world and stop sending, they're the people that they're talking about, how they need to be the party of the working people, how they need to be the voice of the working people again and not the voice of the elite. Stop sending the working people's men and sons and daughters to go die in these wars. That's a huge way that you can help out working class America. So if you believe in that, I would encourage you to donate to her campaign as well. She needs like over 130,000 individual donors, and she needs to be polling at 2% to get into the next debate. Literally, if you donate $1, that counts. So I would encourage, if you believe in what she's saying, if you like the fact that there's somebody out there talking about being anti-war who knows what they're talking about, I would encourage you to donate, however much you want to as well. $1 will do it. $1 will do it. So that was what I wanted to get to, the main point I wanted to get to. So I was very impressed with how she did in the very limited amount of time that she was given. That's kind of what it came down to last night. There wasn't a whole lot that separated most of these candidates. Most of them agreed on pretty much everything, and you're just splitting hairs on the exact, nuances of the policy and how you would, institute it. This was one of the really few ways in which a candidate really separated themselves. Nobody else really wanted to touch foreign policy that much, and the only one who really tried to dive in was Tim Ryan, and he got owned, trying to challenge Tulsi on it. So again, I think it's a good thing that she was able to be on this stage and that she's out there being able to speak on this. So I hope that she's able to make it on the next debate stage. My guess is that she's probably going to be treated a lot like Ron Paul was in the 2008 presidential election, and that the corporate media is going to ignore her. I'm actually gonna, let's see. I'm interested. I'm gonna search Google right now, see what comes up as far as the top results. See if they're trying to influence them at all. Drudge Instant Poll shows Gabbard winning the first Democratic debate. Tulsi Gabbard was most searched candidate. Tulsi Gabbard on Twitter. There's some videos of her Wikipedia page. Images come up. Congresswoman Gabbard for president. Ballotpedia. Tulsi Gabbard is having a MAGA moment after her debate performance. Okay, by BuzzFeed, of course, by BuzzFeed News. So that's one of the top results on the page. And then the last result on the page is Tulsi Gabbard was most searched candidate after Democratic debate. So nothing too skewed as far as that goes. So that'll be interesting to see where that goes. I know Google plans on trying to do what they can to influence this election as well. So we'll see kind of where this goes. But it was interesting debate, like I said. A lot of suggestions about increasing the size and scope of government. Not one mention in this entire debate, not a single mention of the national debt. Not a single mention of the fact that we're $22 trillion in debt. Of course, because none of them care. They all plan on increasing the size and the scope and the spending of government with no intention of bringing that debt down. So, not surprising, but still just, we're talking about national security. We're talking about threats to the democracy of America. We're talking about foreign threats. And we're talking about climate change and the threat that can pose is what's being talked about. And then we're not touching the dead at all. Nobody's going to bring it up. Not surprising, but still just okay. Doesn't work to just ignore it. It's going to have to face the music on that eventually. So, but again, pretty standard, pretty much what I thought it would be. And I'm glad Tulsi was able to have her moment and that people are searching her out. I would highly suggest, if you like what you heard from Tulsi last night, check out both of her interviews on Joe Rogan. They're long form conversations. They're both like 2 hours long, I believe, maybe 2.5. And they just talk about a whole bunch of stuff, predominantly anti-war stuff. And it's great. And you get a good feel for her and what she's all about. And if you want to, dig into it a little more, check out Barry Weiss on Joe Rogan. There's a clip of it, just Barry Weiss, Tulsi on Joe Rogan, or Assad on Joe Rogan, and it's just funny watching her fall apart, accusing Tulsi of being an Assad toady, and then Joe's not even like, he's not even coming at her in an attacking way. He's just asking like, okay, well, like how, what did she do? Like, what are you basing that on? And Barry Weiss says nothing. She can't come up with anything. And then at the very end, she like finds on her phone, she's like, she was in support of conversion camps when she was 16. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, she's awful. So yeah, check that out too if you want to. Again, I would be a full-on supporter of Tulsi if her domestic policies were better, but she's really good on anti-war, and we need somebody out there saying that. We need somebody out there reaching the national audience, talking about that, trying to get back the anti-war left. Gosh, the anti-war movement needs the anti-war back desperately. I miss them, which is weird, but I miss them a lot. I want them to come back. So hopefully Tulsi can inspire a lot of that within the left and within the Democratic Party. So going to start getting ready for the next debate. Should be starting in about an hour here. So thanks again for listening, y'all. You are a sovereign individual, and so is everybody on that stage. And while I disagree with almost everything that they said, I respect the fact that they're sovereign individuals. So looking forward to tonight, and we'll see what happens. Well, not looking forward, but you know what I mean. And we'll be back tomorrow talking about the second night of the debates. We got Biden versus Bernie. Andrew Yang is going to be on there as well. He'll be interesting to hear from. He's another, I think, pretty genuine candidate. So thanks again for listening, y'all. Talk to you soon.